Hello everyone, Rurikhan here coming at you with another video. Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV, and today I'm going to be doing my best to answer the question as to whether or not Final Fantasy XIV is a game that is worth your time in 2020. Because I realize that nowadays there are so many games that are available for us to play, and there's quite simply not enough hours in the day. So you're left wondering, like, is this going to be the game that pays off in terms of how much entertainment I'm going to be getting out of it if I spend enough time with it? Or is this going to be a game that is quite simply not for me? So I'm going to be telling you about the unique aspects of Final Fantasy XIV, my own personal journey throughout Final Fantasy XIV, and hopefully that will help you make a decision as to whether or not this is a game that you want to invest some time into. Now, for those of you that are not aware, I actually played Final Fantasy XIV all the way back during its closed beta, and I'm talking about Realm Reborn. I'm not talking about 1.0. I never played Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, and for those of you that are not aware between the distinction of 1.0 and Realm Reborn, initially when Final Fantasy XIV launched, it was real bad. Things did not work out. The gameplay was pretty bad. The story was not amazing. I mean, the overarching story itself, I think, was actually okay, but the way in which they did the main story quests and all that stuff was not very well done. Basically, the game was a complete mess, and then eventually they scrapped the whole thing, and then they relaunched it as a Realm Reborn. So the closed beta that I'm talking about is actually the Realm Reborn closed beta. That was the first time that I was exposed to this game, and I was coming into it as someone who had an extensive World of Warcraft background, as I think many people that dedicate time to playing MMOs. I think at some point in our lives, we've either seen stuff about World of Warcraft or we've played World of Warcraft. In my case, I was even like raiding in World of Warcraft, doing all of the endgame activities of World of Warcraft, and I was just checking out Final Fantasy XIV to try out something new. And let me just tell you that I played this game completely the wrong way, both during the closed beta and during its launch, which I played during both of those times. And the way that I played the game was the same way that I would play World of Warcraft, right? You go up to an NPC, he's got a question marker on top of his head, you pick up a quest, you gather as many of those as you possibly can, and then you go out into the world and you try to find the quest markers and you start killing everything, right? That's kind of like how I was playing MMOs, because that's pretty much the way that my brain was trained to play MMOs because of how much I played World of Warcraft. That is most definitely not the way that you want to play Final Fantasy XIV. Let me tell you that right now. Like, if you want to go ahead and do all of the quests, you can go right ahead. But most importantly, Final Fantasy XIV is a game that has a very rich story, which means that a lot of the quests are important, particularly the main story quests. And it's going to be very important for you to differentiate between what type of quests you are picking up, because a big, heavy focus on this game is going to be on its main story. Now, I already know that some of you guys are already wondering, okay, but what type of MMO is it? Is it like action combat? Is it going to be tap targeting? And this is very much tap targeting. And as a matter of fact, in a lot of ways, Final Fantasy XIV's gameplay is incredibly similar to World of Warcraft. And I know that some people that play Final Fantasy XIV are going to come in, no, because this thing is different and that thing is different. And yes, you're all right. But you guys need to understand, I'm trying to talk to people that essentially have not played Final Fantasy XIV and may not have the nuanced understanding of all of the differences, and we will get into some of those differences throughout this video. But basically, in broad strokes, if you've played World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV is going to feel very familiar. One of the main differences is going to be that you're actually going to have skills that kind of play off of other skills. So what does that mean? That means that certain skills will have like a very specific rotation that you will want to do. And I know that some classes in World of Warcraft also have that, but in a lot of times you're basically just like, find out what are the 4 most important buttons for my class and then just smash my face against the keyboard. So long as I hit in the general vicinity of those 4 buttons, then I should be doing all right. That's pretty much how World of Warcraft kind of works, depending on the class that you play. Some classes a little bit more complex, some classes a little bit less complex. In 14, the rotation is much more stricter. Again, this varies depending on the job that you are playing, which classes in Final Fantasy XIV are called jobs. But ultimately, yes, it is a tap targeting MMO, but it is not an MMO that is just kind of like go in and not pay attention to the story. Now, I understand that not everybody cares about the story. And, you know, if that's you, that is fine. I'm not going to be judging people if they don't like the story. That's going to be up to each and every individual to do how they see fit. But I do think that it is a very enjoyable story, and it is a story that kind of like takes place across all of the expansions, and it actually tells you what the story is. It's not like, oh yeah, you have to go read some third-party material, or you have to go read this book online, or you have to figure out where this piece of the story came from, and all that jazz. No, the story is told through you throughout the narrative of the game. There are multiple cutscenes. There's multiple very important events that take place. And for a lot of the things that actually happen in Realm Reborn, there's payout all the way into the latest expansion. So it's like the story takes a lot of twists and turns, and it's really, really good. Now, naturally, not every single quest in the game is going to be the most interesting thing of all times, like particularly when you start reaching like into your 30s and you start doing the Titan quest line. That is potentially one of the worst moments in the game, because they just have you do a bunch of menial tasks that make no sense whatsoever, and it's just boring as all hell. But, you know, there is payoff if you suffer through some of that. So I'm not going to say that, oh yeah, the story is perfect and it's amazing. Like, it has moments that are less great. It has moments that has you do the traditional MMO thing of like, oh, go get me this thing and go get me that thing and go kill this thing and go kill that thing and then come back to me and yada, yada, yada. And you guys know what I'm talking about. Some of the more boring quest lines. It's got that as well, right? But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that the further you get into the expansions, the better the game gets at kind of like respecting your time and not really having you run around and doing stupid stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, because a lot of people will paint the story of Final Fantasy XIV as like the most perfect thing ever. I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, another very important thing is that with the latest patch of Final Fantasy XIV, they also expanded its free trial. And what that means is that you can basically create a trial account and you can play through a certain portion of the game for free with no time limits whatsoever. And you can level as many classes as you want to the level cap of the trial, which is currently level 60. And that should give you a pretty good idea as to whether or not this is going to be a game that is going to be right up your alley. And interestingly enough, I made a video about this in my other channel, and I've seen a lot of people say, oh yeah, it's not worth my time because of the subscription fee, and I don't want to get invested in an MMO that has a subscription fee, and all of that stuff. And it's like, a subscription fee MMO is actually something that I can appreciate, because you know that at least it's not going to have like some weird cash shop progression stuff that is going to kind of like imbalance the entire game's economy or just basically allow you to buy power. Because for instance, something that you can do in World of Warcraft right now is you can go ahead and you buy, what's that thing called? The WoW token that gives you in-game time, and you can then sell that WoW token in the auction house, get yourself gold, which basically means you have a direct way to buy in-game gold, and then you can use that gold in the auction house in some cases to actually buy best in slot gear, either crafted or, you know, bind on equip drops. There's a lot of stuff that you can get in the auction house, but basically WoW tokens directly translate into buying power in a subscription MMO, which to me is still something that I'm just like, dude, what are you even doing right now? That is not the case, at least up until this point with Final Fantasy XIV. I hope it does not become the case. But interestingly enough, whenever I played World of Warcraft, there was always this thing where the only thing that really matters is like the current expansion, right? So you go, imagine if you start playing right now, you want to rush through the whole game to get the BFA. I believe there's even like an introduction system that takes you to BFA almost immediately. So your whole purpose is like, okay, just ignore everything that came before it. Let's just go right to the current content. And that is most definitely not the case with Final Fantasy XIV. In Final Fantasy XIV, the content still remains somewhat relevant through the way that they use their group finder utility, which is the duty finder, where basically they give everyone daily rewards for doing specific types of activities. And then whenever there's like a new player queuing for a dungeon, they might put a veteran in there together with them to kind of help them through that dungeon, and they reward the veteran player with some tomes for gear or some things that they can use to exchange for gems to put in their sockets, which in this game it's called materia. I'm just calling it gems for easier understanding for other players, right? So there's always rewards for veteran players to do older content, and there's constantly people running older content for these rewards that they can get, which basically means that it's not like you're gonna get to a dungeon and it's gonna be like this big problem. Oh, nobody's doing this dungeon anymore because everybody's in the latest expansion. I actually started playing the game from the start last year because I wanted to get involved in Final Fantasy XIV for a while, and I wanted to get into it. And I actually started everything from scratch last year, played through all of the expansions, and I was able to do all of the content with the exception of like Coils of Bahamut or something, because that's a little bit trickier. That's a very old raid, and you actually need to try and get a group if you want to do that. But, you know, it's like one piece of content amidst all the other content that is available to you. So what I'm trying to say is that, in general, you don't have to rush, because you can enjoy the story at your own pace, because there's always players running old content because they are getting rewarded for it. And therefore, there's just always going to be people to run dungeons, trials, just about all of the activities that are available in the game. And that leads me to most video games for me. I always think of video games as a journey. I very rarely think of them as a destination, because I kind of feel that nowadays, most players look at video games and it's like, oh man, I just, you know, I got to get to the end game. What's the end game of the thing? Like, a lot of times games aren't even out yet and people are just concerned about what's the end game of this game going to be. And it's like, I don't think the end game, particularly in 14, shouldn't be the thing that you focus on while you are experiencing it. The journey is worth it. And what I'm saying with this is, like, for all the people that told me stuff like, oh, I don't want to get into the game because of the subscription fee. There is no subscription fee if you get yourself a free trial and you play all the way through A Realm Reborn and then Heaven's Word, which is the base game and the first expansion, because all of those are included in the free trial. So what I'm trying to say is that the journey through Realm Reborn and Heaven's Word alone is like over 100 hours of gameplay, I think. I don't know exactly how many hours it's going to be. It also depends on how often you play, whether or not you play on like a server that has the road to level 70 buff, et cetera, right? There's a lot of things that influence exactly how long the experience is going to be for you. But like I said, it is 100 hours. And it is 100 hours that is worth experiencing. And at the same time, it is 100 hours that will make you understand whether or not this is a game for you. Some people will start playing Final Fantasy XIV, and, you know, within the first 10 levels, they'll realize, okay, this is definitely not for me. I don't like this tab targeting system. I don't like the way the story is going. I don't like whatever. There's a million reasons why someone might not like it, because I'm not doing this video to try and convince people, hey, everybody, get into Final Fantasy XIV. It's like the best game ever. No, because the game is not for everyone. Like I said, this is very much a story-driven MMO, and I'm actually surprised because there's some people that choose not to do the story and they still really enjoy the Final Fantasy XIV endgame, the Final Fantasy XIV raids, the trials, the dungeons. People enjoy the endgame of Final Fantasy XIV despite the fact that they didn't like the story. But, you know, that is just something that I don't think it's going to be everyone. And at the same time, you will be able to experience some of these trials, some of these raids, to understand how these mechanics work in Realm Reborn as well as Heaven's Word. Therefore, just playing a little bit through the trial will allow you to understand whether or not this is going to be something for you. So my initial answer to the question that I posed in this title is play the trial. Like, don't even think too much about it, play the trial. And I know that some people are like, oh, but I created an account God knows how long ago, and now, you know, I can't get back into that account because I played during a free weekend and all that. And it's like, look, just create a new account. Like, you can make a Gmail email in less than 5 minutes. All you need is an email to create an account. So just create like a new Gmail email and create a new account and go to town. Just try it out. They also streamlined a lot of the stuff in Realm Reborn, because if you do any research into Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of players will complain about the slog that is A Realm Reborn and the fact that they were locked out of quests and stuff like that because of experience. The main scenario quests were not given enough experience. They changed all that so that you would never really be locked outside of your main scenario quest. So you can just like experience the story all the way through, and you can mostly ignore side quests unless there's something that interests you. And I think one of the biggest things that I would say is that you really don't need to rush. Like, I took my sweet time. I did all of the raids and that while they were still relevant for my character level. I did all of the expansions content to really experience everything and try everything out. I didn't like everything, but I always enjoyed the MSQ, and I always enjoyed how it flows from one expansion to another, creating one big cohesive narrative that has really kind of culminated in 5.3. And I want to talk more about 5.3, but that's probably going to be its own video. I just wanted to do something a little bit different before I talked about 5.3, right? Because there's a lot of story to discuss there and a lot of opinions that I have about it. Now, some of you might wonder, okay, so Rurikhan, what is the raiding scene like in Final Fantasy XIV? Well, for starters, the most important raids are usually made in parties of 8. You only really need 8 players, and raids are very much these self-contained experiences. There's 2 types of raids. There's the regular raids, and then there are the alliance raids. Now, regular raids, basically, you go straight to a boss. Like, there's no trash. You go straight to a boss. You fight that boss. You learn that boss, and then eventually you kill that boss. And there's degrees of difficulty, particularly if you're someone that is really hardcore into raiding. You're looking at doing some of the Savage content, most likely, which personally I haven't gotten involved in yet because my schedule just doesn't allow for that, unfortunately. But yeah, finding yourself like a static and learning about the wonders of raiding in Final Fantasy XIV is something that I personally think is really cool, because I've done the raids on normal, and on normal you can actually just queue for them, and it's usually not a problem. People can figure out the strategies and stuff, because the interesting thing about the way that Final Fantasy does raid techniques and all of that stuff and how stuff works in the game is they gradually introduce it throughout other fights so that you know, oh, when this tower looking thing shows up, I need to stand below it because there's going to be a big AoE, and me standing below it's going to block it. I'm going to take some damage, but the raid itself is not going to take the damage. Or when you see like a stack marker, which is like arrows pointing inward to a specific character, you know, oh, we have to stack in that location so that everybody can share the damage. So they have this very good language with the special effects that they have in the game that kind of teach you as you play through the game the different mechanics that the game has and the different things that you're going to have to do in order to deal with those mechanics, which makes it so that doing the raids, at least on normal mode, is very intuitive. You can figure it out fairly easily after you know, maybe wipe a couple of times to learn some mechanics. But that's where the cool thing comes in, which is the community of Final Fantasy XIV, which is actually a really cool community. Now, am I going to say that they are perfect? Of course not. Every community, every gaming community out there is going to have some bad apples. This is completely and utterly unavoidable. But I can tell you that in the case of Final Fantasy XIV, those bad apples are the exception and not the norm. Normally, you find players that, at least that's been my experience, like throughout all of the hours that I've put into the game, you tend to find players that are usually pretty nice about explaining mechanics to you and stuff like that, and be like, oh, you died to this mechanic, here's the stuff that you should be doing. Or if you just don't know, just ask, and most people will be happy to answer. But again, you know, particularly now with the free trial, I've seen an influx of players that, you know, let's just say they're not the most sociable people. Like, I've seen people go into a dungeon and an archer just starts pulling everything in the dungeon, and the tank's like, hey, can we maybe not pull everything in the dungeon? And then the archer's like, oh, but I need the EXP. And it's like, yes, you can ask me and I will pull the things for you. You don't have to basically pull the whole dungeon and get us all killed. Because it's like, it's not a problem when people pull for you. It's a problem when people are getting too greedy with the amount of EXP that they want to get, and they just pull the whole damn dungeon and cause a wipe. And for those of you that actually play Final Fantasy XIV, the example that I'm talking about is Aurum Vale. Like, I had an archer go into Aurum Vale, starts pulling literally everything at the entrance, and then tells our tank, which wasn't me at the time, tells our tank, hey man, I need EXP. And the tank's like, well, you got us all killed. twice. That's not going to be very good EXP per hour now, is it? But yeah, like I said, there's bad apples, particularly now with the free trial. You're more likely to encounter some of those bad apples because they literally have no money in the game, so they don't really care about anything. But, you know, it's overall, the community has been tremendously welcoming, and usually whenever you're running something, they'll be happy to tell you, okay, here's the mechanic that you are failing, here is why you are failing, instead of just like, you know, rage quitting or saying something about your mother, which is usually what tends to happen in most online games. It's always about your mother or your sister or your girlfriend or your wife. It's always about one of your significant others and them doing something about one of your significant others. But like I said, in Final Fantasy XIV, that type of stuff usually doesn't happen, but your mileage is going to vary now that the trial has been expanded. But I do feel like the game itself has a tendency to kind of like weed these people out because they don't tend to stick around too long, because either they don't like the story, they don't like the pacing of the game, because this is very much a slow-paced game when it comes to you going through it. It's not the type of game that you're gonna like burn through in a day or two. It's the type of game that you just like take the time, savor it, and enjoy it. And again, it's very important to mention that if you're not into tap targeting MMOs, this is not going to be the MMO that's going to convince you to get into tap targeting MMOs, because it's not doing anything tremendously groundbreaking in there. One of the biggest differences, like I said, is the sequence of skills that you have to do. Like certain skills will get bonus damage if you do them in a certain order, and you will want to do them and apply them in a certain order. So for instance, I play a paladin. That's kind of like my main class. I also play a bunch of other jobs, which the cool thing about Final Fantasy XIV is that you can literally do all of the jobs in the same class, in the same character, I mean. So it's not like, oh, I played, I don't know, a tank for all this time. Turns out I actually don't like tanking. Guess I'll go start a new character and go through the story all over again. No, you don't have to do that. It's as literally as easy as swapping your weapon. You swap your weapon, you swap to a different job. So like you buy yourself an axe, equip an axe, now you're a marauder. You buy yourself a book, equip a book, now you're an arcanist. It's literally like that. I'm not even joking. You go to, you know, like an in-game shop that sells you stuff for in-game currency and sells you weapons. Just get like the most basic ass weapon that you can get off of the vendor, equip it, boom, you're that class now. That's how that works. And that works both for, classes that whose objective is to deal damage and actually play the game and engage in combat and stuff like that. So healers, tanks, DPSers, whatever. You can also do that for professions. So like crafters, gatherers, all of that stuff. It's like, oh, equip a pickaxe, boom, you're a miner. Equip a hammer, boom, you're a blacksmith. That's pretty much how the game works. And after you equip those weapons or whatever, you can just go out and start doing activities with this new class and try it out and see if you like it. That's actually one of the things that I really enjoy, because it's always hard whenever you're in an MMO and you're like, okay, so I have to go make this alt because I want to try out this different class, and you have to level the class all the way up. You still have to level it in Final Fantasy XIV, but you can use the things that you get from your main class to get an advantage. Like, hey, maybe you made some money on your main class. Maybe you have a piece of loot that you got from a dungeon that you can't really use on your main class, but you can use it on the healer class or on a caster class or something like that. So you already have all of those things in your character. All you got to do is just like swap the gear up and try out the new class. And then there's mechanics that allow you to level up a little bit faster. So like I was telling you guys about the group finder and rewarding veteran players. One of the rewards, for instance, is you get additional XP for some of the activities that you do. So you pick up like one of these other jobs that you want to try out, and you go do one of these dungeons that gives you additional experience. Boom, you level up way faster with your second class than you did with your first one. You also have a better understanding of how the game works, better understanding of the game's systems and all of that jazz. So it's pretty good. Another really good thing about Final Fantasy XIV is the fact that it is also available on consoles, whereas most MMOs usually tend to stick with PC. Case in point, even Amazon's upcoming MMO, New World, is pretty much going to be a PC exclusive. There's no plans whatsoever to go on consoles. And the cool thing about the MMO being on consoles is that it has controller support. And I know that a lot of people are going to be like, oh man, playing an MMO with God knows how many abilities on a controller, that must be nice. And yes, actually it is. As a matter of fact, I started playing the game with a controller and I cannot make the transition to mouse and keyboard right now because of, I already have all the muscle memory of the controller. And recently I was like, oh, let me try doing mouse and keyboard. And I'm like, it's completely crazy. So once you get used to the muscle memory of the controller, it actually becomes harder for you to go back. But again, there's no specific advantage to playing one way or the other. Let's just say that the way that they did controller support makes it so that there's actually people in the highest tiers of rating that are basically playing on a controller. And they're doing just as fine as their PC counterparts, as their mouse and keyboard counterparts. It's perfectly okay. And the other thing is, even if you're on a console and you're like, yeah, I still would rather play mouse and keyboard, that's fine. Hook them up and they work instantly. You don't even have to like, oh, I need to hook them up before I launch the game. No, launch the game and you're like, oh, I forgot to hook up my mouse and keyboard. Just hook them up instantly, boom, it works. So you can actually play the whole thing mouse and keyboard on a console as well. Unfortunately, the game is not out on the Xbox One yet, but it is coming to Xbox as well. I'm not sure if they're waiting for the Series X or what the deal is with that, but basically when the game comes out on the Xbox, it basically means that this is an MMO that you can play on PC, PlayStation 4, or Xbox One. It's got crossplay. It does require you to have the license of the game on each of the platforms though, which kind of sucks in my opinion, if you really think about it. Because, you bought the game on a platform, then suddenly if you want to play it on another platform, you have to buy the game again. But basically you get to use the same account, the same progression. So like I've been playing a lot on PC. If I wanted to suddenly switch to my PS4, all I have to do is launch the game on PS4, boom, same character, same progression, all of that jazz. But with it being across 3 platforms, it means that if you have friends that, are curious about the game and maybe want to play the game with you and all that jazz, it doesn't really matter if they're on Xbox, PS4, or PC, because you can all play together. And that is pretty damn cool, if I can say so myself, because I've been playing with people from PC, I've been playing with people from PS4, I've been playing with both of these platforms, and I really can't wait for the Xbox One version to eventually get released as well. But yeah, I think I've talked a whole lot. I think I've explained a whole lot, and right now I would actually pass it off to you guys. Do you guys have any questions about Final Fantasy XIV that you'd like to ask? Because I'm sure that there will be people that will be willing to answer all those questions. I'll also be keeping tabs on the comments of this video as much as I can. But ultimately, the answer to the question, should you play Final Fantasy XIV in 2020, is play the trial. Just play the trial. It'll be super easy for you to figure out if it's for you or not. But in my opinion, you should definitely give it a shot. And even if you end up not, getting a subscription and not going any further than Heavensward, I can guarantee you that if you're someone who likes a good story, it is still worth your time. And I know that Realm Reborn story sometimes can get boring and all of that, but dude, just hang in there, because when you get to Heavensward, when you start seeing the story of Heavensward, it makes it all worth it. And if you eventually progress all the way into Shadowbringers, it makes it even more worth it. Although I will say, when you get to Stormblood, it's gonna be a little bit harsh. I personally don't like Stormblood all that much, but you can probably tell that by looking at the other videos that I put on the channel. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button. If you did not enjoy it, hit the dislike button, because feedback is important. Stay safe out there. Stay strong. Peace out.